Shalom levoy navoy, Yem Hashem lo yishmor, Shav shokat shoymai, Yem Hashem lo yirne bayis. Shalom levoy navoy, Yem Hashem lo yishmor, Shav shokat shoymai, Yem Hashem lo yirne bayis. Shalom levoy navoy, Yem Hashem lo yishmor, Shav shokat shoymai, Yem Hashem lo yirne bayis. Shalom lo boy no boy, Yem Hashem lo yishmor, Shav shokat shoymai. Hine lo yonum velo yishon, lo yonum velo yishon, shoymai Yisrael. Hine lo yonum velo yishon, lo yonum velo yishon, shoymai Yisrael. Hine lo yonum velo yishon. Lo yanum velo yishon, shoymei Yisrael. Hine lo yanum velo yishon, lo yanum velo yishon, shoymei Yisrael. Hashem lo yivne bayis, shalom lo boy no boy, Yem Hashem lo yishmor, Shav shokat shoymei. Yem Hashem lo yivne bayis. Shalom lo boy no boy, Yem Hashem lo yishmor, Shav shokat shoymei. Yem Hashem lo yirne bayis. Shalom lo boy no boy, Yem Hashem lo yishmor, Shav shokat shoymei. Yem Hashem lo yirne bayis. Shalom lo boy no boy, Yem Hashem lo yishmor, Shav shokat shoymei. Hine lo yanum velo yishon, lo yadum v'lo yisham, shoymei Yisrael. Hine lo yadum v'lo yisham, lo yadum.
Hello, my holy sisters and brothers. It's so good to be back with you. That was the Shira choir singing Lo Yivnei Bayis, Hashem Lo Yivnei Bayis. It's great to be back. We're back from Yosemite. And just in time for one of the biggest pages in the Talmud, one of the most famous teachings. One of these teachings here, Nina and I have taught it many times. I've learned it many times. But it's always taught just a little part of it about the conflict between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. Today we're going to do the whole page so that we understand the flow as we get into that teaching, and it's going to make it that much more spectacular. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us on this fine Saturday evening? Vaughn Billow says shalom from Fremont, Ohio. Patrice Carter says hello from St. George. Sue Strauss in the house from Chicago. By the way, we normally on both YouTube and Facebook. For some reason, YouTube is not working tonight, so hopefully the people who are looking for this on YouTube are going to find us over here on Facebook. Gwen Strong says, howdy, hope you had a great vacation. Bill Eldridge says, shalom and welcome back from vacation. Gene Pyle is with us from Lincoln, Nebraska. Donald, Jean, Karen from New Mexico. Chanel McDowell says Shabbat Shalom from Michigan. Pauline Michael says Shivuto from Arkansas. Christo Cheney is with us from Lubbock, Texas. Stephanie Marie Diaz says Shivuto and welcome back. Harold Black says Shivuto from Oregon. Renee Bainwell is here. That's great to see. Christo Cheney says, glad you're back. Paul Cunis says, Shavua Tov from Minneapolis. George Ann Gash from Louisville, Kentucky. Judy Robert says, hello from Grants Pass, Oregon. And Wiley Osborne says, hello from Arkansas. And Rachel Sage says, shalom from New Haven, Connecticut. All right, my holy brothers and sisters, this is so big. Here we go. All right. So first of all, where are we? A big thanks to Rabbi Aaron Parry and Rabbi Albish Rand, who filled in for me while I was away in Yosemite. They did a great job. They each did 3 classes, and they got better and better as they got used to this format. It's not the easiest way to teach. They're used to teaching people in a live classroom setting. But they did great, and thank you for welcoming them. Okay, so we're on page 13 of Tractate Eruvin, the 3rd volume of the Talmud. These first 12 days, they've been very technical, right? They've been very technical as we've struggled to understand exactly how we correct an alleyway that is basically a private lane accessing a collection of private properties. As we understand in Talmudic times, people lived in courtyards, sort of townhouses in courtyards. Right? So each courtyard had at least 2 townhouses. These courtyards opened up onto a private lane that we've been referring to as an alleyway. And then that private lane would go out to the main road. And our sages have been instructing us how to correct that private lane so that people could carry there between the townhomes, as it were, in those various courtyards, and before they go out to the public domain where they can't carry on Shabbos. We're assuming this is a community that doesn't have a community-wide Eruv. So we're just making a correction so that there's carrying in that private lane. And it's been a lot of technical matters. But two important things emerge from this. Number one, we have to understand, what are we doing here in Tractate Eruvin? It's amazing. I mean, we're saying that any space is not just a space. A space around our homes, in our communities, in our neighborhoods, is a place where holiness might happen or it might not. So when we are mindful and we're saying, okay, we want to prepare this space for our use on Shabbos to enhance the sanctity and beauty and joy of Shabbos, and so we're going to make these corrections during the week, it's already a beautiful and mindful practice. And our sages want to get it just right. They're going to disagree with each other quite a bit about how we achieve that. Now we're studying the second Mishna of Tractate Eruvin, and it opens with one of these many disagreements between the followers of Hillel and the followers of Shammai, called the House of Hillel, Beis Hillel, and the House of Shammai, Beis Shammai. So one of the things that they disagreed on was how to make that adjustment in that private lane so that people could carry there on Shabbos. In the Mishnah, we learn that Beis Hillel say you need either a side post or next to that entrance to the alley or a cross beam above it. Beis Shammai say you need both, the side post and the cross beam above. We also heard that Rabbi Eliezer said you need 2 side posts. In that same Mishnah, at the beginning of this section we've been discussing, we learned that a certain student, that's how he's explained, how he's described, a certain student said before Rabbi Akiva, in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, that Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai did not disagree, how does he put it? That their disagreement only concerns an alley that is between 4 cubits and 10 cubits wide at its entrance. And therefore that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree on how to correct a very narrow alley, an alley that is 4 cubits wide or less. A cubit is about 1.5 feet, so this is an alley that's only about 6 feet wide. According to the student who said this teaching in front of Rabbi Akiva, he said that Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai only disagree when that alley is between 4 cubits wide and 10 cubits wide. Beyond 10 cubits is another factor. As we saw in the first Mishnah, we'd have to shrink that doorway down unless we have the complete form of a doorway there. So this student taught in the name of Rabbi Yishmael in front of Rabbi Akiva that the dispute between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai only concerns this intermediate stage between 4 and 10 cubits wide. And Rabbi Akiva said, no, the student is wrong. They disagree in both cases, whether it's narrower than 4 cubits or between 4 cubits and 10 cubits wide. Now, on today's page 13, actually at the very bottom of page 12, we pick up this flow again. Now we're going to talk about this student, the student who spoke before Rabbi Akiva. So he taught one way. Rabbi Akiva said, you're wrong. So the first thing the Gemara asks is, why are we mentioning Rabbi Akiva at all? Rabbi Akiva's view is the same view as the Mishnah, that Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai disagreed about how to correct an alley. That's what Rabbi Akiva is saying. They disagree in all cases, from 0 all the way up to 10 cubits wide. No distinction if it's narrower than 4 cubits wide. That's the same view as the Mishnah. Why doesn't it just say Beis Hillel said this and Beis Shammai said that, and a certain student said it was a different way, and we would understand that this student brought another opinion, but it was not the law. Why do we need Rabbi Akiva to say the student is wrong and the law is the way we thought that it was? Why? That's the question. So, let's see. The Gemara says that Rav Achlai says, no, the reason that Rabbi Akiva is bringing this correction on the student is because there is a difference between what Rabbi Akiva is saying and what the Mishna was saying according to the anonymous teaching, the sort of generally accepted view about what the difference was between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. Namely, that if it's narrower than 4 cubits, they might agree, but what they're agreeing on, Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai might agree, but what they're agreeing on is not how to correct it with less than 4 cubits, which according to the student was either a post or a crossbeam. Rather, says Rav Achlai, if it's narrower than 4 cubits, you don't need any correction at all. Such an alley is so narrow that it is understood to be an extension of those courtyards. It's more like a footpath that marries those courtyards together. So that's one explanation of why Rabbi Akiva brings down this sort of extra information that the student is wrong, which we could have figured out even if Rabbi Akiva hadn't spoken within the Mishnah. Okay, the Baraisa now is brought down that Rabbi Akiva had a little bit more to say than just the student was wrong. According to Rabbi Akiva in the Baraisa, so Baraisas are teachings contemporaneous with the Mishnah, but didn't have quite the authoritative level of the Mishnah. According to this Baraisa, Rabbi Akiva said that Rabbi Yishmael didn't say this, right? The student brought his teaching in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, saying that Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai agree on how to correct an alley that's less than 4 cubits wide, and that was with either a side post or a crossbeam. But Rabbi Akiva says Rabbi Yishmael didn't teach that, as he knows what the law is, presumably meaning that Rabbi Yishmael knows that it can be corrected with nothing at all, or whatever. However Rabbi Akiva is understanding it, what the student is bringing is not in the name of Rabbi Yishmael. Rather, the student is bringing his own ruling, says Rabbi Akiva in our Baraisa. And then Rabbi Akiva concludes by saying, and the halacha, the law, concords with the student. So the Gemara immediately questions, wait, what's Rabbi Akiva saying? He's saying that this student is not bringing this teaching in the name of Rabbi Yishmael because Rabbi Yishmael knows better, would imply that the student has the law wrong. But then Rabbi Akiva concludes by saying, and the law accords with the student. How are we to understand this? Let me get it in front of me. So Rav Yehuda explains that what was going on here is that Rabbi Akiva would tell this story about how the student brought his own ruling. It was at variance with Rabbi Yishmael's understanding, and the law accords with the student, or rather, the student has it right. The student has it right. His analysis was so sharp that the student got it right. Nevertheless, says Rav Yehuda, Rabbi Akiva didn't rule according to this student. The student was so sharp, so incisive, so clever that he was able to prove his point, and Rabbi Akiva, the great Rabbi Akiva, the one whose Torah was second only to Moses, who brought the Torah down from heaven, Rabbi Akiva says, the law does not accord with this, but he's right. He's told the truth. You can't question his argumentation. It's perfect. Nevertheless, the law is not like this student. And we're going to come back to this point. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says, whenever you hear about a student of Rabbi Akiva or a student of Rabbi Yishmael, the Talmud means none other than the great Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir, as they would call him, Rabbi Meir. He studied under both Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. The Baraisa teaches that Rabbi Meir said, when I studied under Rabbi Yishmael, I used to put cancantum, which is a chemical that we know as copper sulfate, into the ink that he used to write Torah scrolls. So Rabbi Meir, in addition to being such a brilliant student and later such a brilliant rabbi, also worked as a scribe, and he literally would write Torah scrolls. And he says that when he studied under Rabbi Yishmael, he would put this chemical, copper sulfate, which is a fixer, into the ink that he would use to write the Torah scrolls. But when I came to study under Rabbi Akiva, he prohibited me from adding the copper sulfate into the ink, right? So it would make the ink bind much tighter to the parchment on which it was written so that it couldn't be blotted out by water. And that we'll see in a moment why that's important. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, who said in the name of Rabbi Meir, that Rabbi Meir said, when I studied under Rabbi Akiva, I put copper sulfate in the ink, but then later when I studied under Rabbi Yishmael, he prohibited me putting copper sulfate into the ink. So now the story has been reversed. The first version, when I studied under Rabbi Yishmael, he allowed me to put copper sulfate in the ink, and then in the first version, when I studied under Akiva, he allowed me to put copper sulfate in the ink, and then when I went to Rabbi Yishmael, he said, no. I'm sorry, the first version is that Rabbi Yishmael allowed me, Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Akiva prohibited, and in the second version, Rabbi Akiva permitted it, and Rabbi Yishmael prohibited. In both cases, he studied under both of these teachers, and we're not sure which he studied under first and which second, and who prohibited him to put the copper sulfate in the ink. As for who he studied with first, what we have come to understand is he first studied under Rabbi Akiva. He was drawn to the greatest scholar that there was in the world, but he couldn't follow Rabbi Akiva's teachings. It was just too complicated, too far above his head when Rabbi Meir was so young. He was accepted as a student by Rabbi Akiva because he was so brilliant, but it was just too far above his head. Then he went and learned with Rabbi Yishmael, and he learned the tradition. In other words, he learned everything that a young sage would need to know. And then he went back to Rabbi Akiva, not to learn the tradition from him, but to learn those highest, most brilliant analytical concepts that Rabbi Akiva could share. And now Rabbi Meir could follow it, right? I feel very much, I understand that when I first did DAF Yomi in 2005, I tried going to a class, a shiur, like I'm giving you, only where they teach everything on each page. But the rabbi who was teaching it spoke so much Hebrew and Aramaic that I just couldn't follow it at all. So I ended up studying on my own, but it wasn't really on my own because I was following the elucidation of Art Scroll, which is like having an incredible team of rabbis teaching it to you. And I did that for 3 years. And then I came back to a shiur very similar to the first one that I tried. And now I could follow it because I had enough exposure to the tradition. So similar to Rabbi Meir, except he's much more brilliant than I am. Okay. Now we have the question, though, well, who prohibited Rabbi Meir from putting this copper sulfate into the ink that he used to write Torah scrolls, and why? As to who prohibited, the Gemara says we're not sure. We can't tell from the way Rabbi Meir told the story because there's two versions of the story. We're not sure who it is that prohibited. Okay, we're not sure, but we know why. So if you put this copper sulfate in the black ink that you use to write a Torah scroll, what happens? If it becomes more fixed to the parchment. So if you spilled water on it, for example, the ink would not run. That's good. Very good, because we want Torah scrolls to be permanent and to last for as long as possible. And it's good for every passage in the Torah except one. There is the passage of the Sota, the suspected adulteress. So we've studied this before. We came on it not that long ago in reading the Torah portion of the week. And so when a wife is suspected of having an affair with another man, there's a procedure where she and her husband go to Jerusalem to the temple when the temple is standing, and they do a test. And it's quite unlike the tests for a witch in old Salem, Massachusetts in the 1600s. There, what they do, it's a true thing, a real thing, a historical thing. It's mentioned in the Bible where they would write these verses that if she indeed committed adultery and is lying about it, because she could admit it and not go through this. But if she lies about it and says she doesn't, and then she goes this test, they write down the verses of this passage that describes it in the Torah, which includes the name of God, and then it's put in a bowl of water, and the ink dissolves into the water. They add a little bit of dirt from the floor of the temple courtyard, and then she drinks it. And if she's innocent, she'll have no problem. And in fact, if she was infertile, now she will bear seed. She'll be able to have a baby. If she did in fact cheat on the husband, then her stomach will blow up and she'll die, and it will be terrible. So that is a passage. So there, Rabbi Meir is telling us you don't want that passage in the Torah to be written with unerasable ink, because it has to be able to be dissolved in the water. And so Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Meir, that Rabbi Meir said, copper sulfite is good for writing all scriptures except the passage of the Sota, because these words may have to be blotted out during the procedure. Rabbi Yaakov says, putting copper sulfate in the ink is fit for all scriptures except the passage of the Sota that's actually used in the temple. So if it's, for a Torah that's just going to stand in a synagogue in New York City, they really don't have to worry that it's ever going to be taken to the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. I think even when the third temple is rebuilt, they're not going to bring that Torah from New York. In fact, what they would do is they would write out those verses when they needed to. And we have a whole discussion that we're not going to go into on this page, whether that passage needs to be written for the specific woman or not. Let's say they wrote it for one woman, she changed her mind, didn't want to do it. Could they use that same parchment for another woman? Discussion for another day. Okay. Rabbi Acha bar Hanina says about Rabbi Meir. And remember, this is all leading to one of the most famous passages in the Talmud when we're going to talk about the difference between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. But to really grasp why that story is brought down a little later on our page, we have to understand what's being said now about Rabbi Meir, the great Rabbi Meir. So, on the topic of Rabbi Meir and his Torah study, the Gemara cites an additional statement. Rabbi Acha bar Hanina said, "It is revealed and known before the one who spoke and the world came into being, that in the generation of Rabbi Meir, there was no one of the sages who is his equal. Why then didn't the sages establish the halacha in accordance with his opinion?" The question is, he was the most brilliant of all the scholars in his generation. At that time, there were open questions of law that the sages as a group were deciding. Generally speaking, in conflicts between a greater sage and a lesser sage, usually the law is going to follow the greater sage. If he was the greatest sage of his generation, why didn't all these disputes that came up between him and other sages end up with the halacha according to Rabbi Meir? That's the question. The Gemara, the first answer offered by the Gemara. He was so brilliant that he could present a cogent argument for any position. The halacha was not fixed according to Rabbi Meir because he was too brilliant. What? What does that mean? He was so brilliant that he could present a cogent argument for any position, even if it was not consistent with the prevalent halacha. As he would state with regard to a tameh item, something that was ritually impure, that it was tahor, that it was pure. And he would state with regard to a ritually pure item, something that was tahor, that it was tameh. In other words, the sages had, let's say they had long discussions, and they finally figured out that for a particular item, perhaps a piece of, of pottery that was in a house, where there was a corpse in the room, and the corpse transmits impurity to everything in the room, but there was an object underneath this piece of pottery that was a shard of pottery that was upside down over this object, and does that object receive a tuma or not? Let's say it was a question like that. And everyone finally came to understand that no, it's protected by the pottery because the outside does not catch or transmit tuma of a pottery shard. I'm not even sure if that's right, but let's say that's right for the moment. Then Rabbi Meir could come along and take you step by step, where every step he said to you, do you agree that? Yes. Do you agree that? Yes. Do you agree that? Yes. And he would lead you step by step where everything he said was absolutely true and inarguable, and he would take you to a conclusion that was the opposite of the accepted law. Now, obviously, this would make everybody else a little bit uncomfortable because now they're thinking, well, wait a minute. Are we discovering the truth that God wanted us to discover in the areas where the law did not make a specific ruling in the written scripture and we had to figure it out for ourselves? And now we've got somebody who's such a genius that he can argue it either way. So then what do? How do we know what's true? Right? And this is a question that's going to come up over and over again. In the context of Tractate Eruvin, we've seen there's all these different ways to correct an alley so that people can carry there on Shabbos. At the end of the day, we have to pick one, or we could say that there's choices, and you could follow whoever your rabbi is. Maybe that's the way. But if there's going to be a normative halacha for all the Jewish people, how can we have faith in it if there's a guy who's so brilliant that can argue it either way? So what should the law be? That's the question, right? That is the challenge that's being asked here. The sages were unable to ascertain. It says, right, it was because his colleagues, why wasn't the halakha established according to Rabbi Meir? It was because his colleagues were unable to ascertain the profundity of his opinion. He could argue it either way. The sages were unable to distinguish between the statements that were halakha and those that were not. His brilliance was too great. Now this is a little bit difficult to understand because we know from another place in the Talmud, it's not taught on this page, that Rabbi Meir was so great that in fact, whenever we come to unattributed mishnas, anonymous mishnas, teachings in the Mishna that are not attributed to any particular rabbi, the tradition says those are Rabbi Meir's teachings. So it's not that his brilliance was so great that they never ruled his way. Ultimately, they follow him on almost everything. So it's like he matured. Now, why wasn't his name associated with these many rulings, which became the basis for the normative halacha for everybody, the unattributed mishnas? That's actually a story from another time. We've already seen once that there was in the generation of Rabban Gamliel that they deposed him as the head of the Sanhedrin, as the Nasi, and they replaced him with Rabbi Elazar ben Arya, the very young Rabbi Elazar ben Arya, because Rabban Gamliel had embarrassed Rabbi Yehoshua in front of all the other sages. He had humiliated him because Rabban Gamliel, he didn't do it to be a jerk. He did it because he said, we need one set of rulings for everybody. And if what emerges from the Sanhedrin, from the sort of chief body of rabbis over the Jewish people is a mixture of rulings, what are people going to do? In the next generation, Rabban Gamliel's son, Shimon ben Gamliel, was the Nasi, and there was an effort to depose him. And probably there was good reason for it. We're not going to go into that story right now. It failed. Rabbi Meir was part of it, and his punishment was that his name was taken out of the record on many of those rulings that he authored. Nevertheless, what we see is early on, he was so brilliant he could argue anything, so the law was not with him. But later, the law was with him in so many of his rulings, and it's a different matter why his name is not associated with it, but rulings certainly went his way. So what is it that he learned along the way? And that's what we're learning about here in this page. Now, how brilliant was he and how dedicated were his friends to him? Excuse me. Rabbi Acha. Okay, I said that. So there's a baraisa that teaches that Rabbi Meir was known as Rabbi Nehorai. Now, we saw this once before. It was on DAF 147 of Tractate Shabbos. Very near the end of Tractate Shabbos, we learned about Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, who was quite elderly at the time that the temple was destroyed. The second temple was destroyed in the year 69. And so the sages all went to Yavne, right? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai established that the Sanhedrin, that the seat of Jewish learning and Jewish authority, moved to the small town of Yavne. Elazar ben Aruch was already pretty old. His wife said to him, "What are you going to go there for? Who knows what's going to happen? Maybe the Romans are going to go there next and kill all of them. Let's just go by ourselves to this nice small town," which was like basically a resort on the beach. It was a beautiful place to live, but the brilliant Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch went there, wasn't in the company of his colleagues, and lost much of his learning. Later, he returned and rejoined them, and it's said that even though we don't have many of his teachings because he separated himself from his colleagues, we have some, and we should remember that he was so brilliant that some say he was Rabbi Nehorai. Rabbi Nehorai, the meaning of the word Nehorai is the one who illuminates the eyes of his colleagues. But the Baraisa is saying here that some say it was Elazar ben Aruch, but the Baraisa teaches that Rabbi Nehorai, the one who illuminated the eyes of his colleagues, was in fact Rabbi Meir. In fact, it's possible that both of them had this nickname. Rabbi Meir was only born after Elazar ben Aruch died. So it's a sort of nickname that could be passed down from a great teacher who still had some problems with his colleagues to another great teacher in the subsequent generation who, as we'll see, also had some problems with his colleagues. Rabbi Meir was the most brilliant, but he was involved in that failed coup to take out Shimon ben Gamliel. And when all his colleagues turned their back on Elisha ben Abuye, the heretic sage, we'll encounter his story later in our journey through the Talmud, but Elisha ben Abuye was a sage who went bad. Really bad, became an enemy of the Jewish people. And even though he was incredibly brilliant, he was, of course, excommunicated and ostracized, and nobody would talk to him, and everybody was disgusted by him. But Rabbi Meir was a personal friend of him and said, this man still has Torah to share that is valid. We need to be able to separate whatever his personality traits are, even his terrible actions, and be able to learn from him. It was almost like Rabbi Meir was against cancel culture with respect to Elisha ben Abuye, who the other ones called Acher. They wouldn't even say his name. They just called him the other one. But Rabbi Meir's position was not accepted on this, and the fact that he had any contact with Acher, with Elisha ben Abuye, was something that bothered Rabbi Meir's colleagues very much. They didn't excommunicate him for continuing to have some kind of small relationship with Acher, but they didn't like it. Okay, so the Baraisa says that it's Rabbi Meir who was the actual Rabbi Nehorai. When we talk about the great Rabbi Nehorai, it's sort of like a nickname given to the most brilliant one in the generation, although something about his teachings may be problematic. Rebbe, the great Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who compiled the Mishna itself, and so he's the one who decided which teachings to include, and so many teachings come from Rabbi Meir, and as we said, the unattributed ones are also from Rabbi Meir, which shows you just like it's most of them, right? It's like so much of the teachings are as Rabbi Meir formulated them and compiled into the Mishnah by Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Rebbe said the reason that he merited to create the Mishnah, because that he was incisive enough to do it, was because, why? Because he sat behind Rabbi Meir in class. Just the fact that he was the closest one, and sitting behind him made his own learning so sharp and incisive for the rest of his life. And Rebbe says that if he had sat in front of Rabbi Meir, he would have been even greater and more incisive for the rest of his life. And even Rabbi Meir's students were known to be incredibly sharp, and like him could produce, reasons that, could say that something was pure and that something was impure. His student Sumachos was able to give 48 reasons why something was pure, and another 48 reasons why that same thing was impure. So, is it great to be brilliant? Is it sufficient to be brilliant? As we've already seen, Rabbi Meir would ultimately have some problems. In the beginning, because of his brilliance, they didn't listen to him. Later, in part because of his brilliance, like his name was taken out of the Talmud and in terms of being, his teachings were still taught, but his name was disassociated with them. Of course, in many, many other places, his name is associated with his teachings. So it's like he had this kind of, somewhat, not tortured, I wouldn't say tortured, but sometimes problematic and sometimes glorious relationship with all of his colleagues. And he was the most brilliant one of all. So is it brilliance in argumentation and analysis that enables somebody to set the law and to say this is the law and what it is? That's the question that's been asked so far. And now to answer that question, we bring this teaching, which is one of the most famous teachings in the Talmud. You've heard Nina and I teach it before, but now we can understand it at such a deeper level. Rabbi Abba said that Shmuel said, for 3 years, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel disagreed. These said the halacha is in accordance with our opinion, and these said the halacha is in accordance with our opinion. Ultimately, a bas kol, a divine voice. A bas kol means the daughter of a voice. But what we're talking about here is a miracle. A miracle was performed. Now, this is much later than the times of prophecy when there were more open miracles in the land of Israel. That was more, before, when the children of Israel were in the wilderness, and then when they came into the land, and they were there for 400 years during the time of the judges and the prophets, and then there was the first temple period, where there were continuous miracles in the Holy Temple all throughout the first temple period, and then we didn't merit to stay in the land, and we lost the temple, and we were exiled for 70 years in the Babylonian exile. Then we came back. The second temple was built. The second temple had much fewer revealed miracles, and soon after it was built, the age of prophecy ended, and the time of open miracles ended, and it was replaced by the rise of the sages. From then on, the word of God would be there had been enough of the word of God transmitted through Torah and the scriptures and the writings that became the Bible. There was enough in there that any questions that came up in the future could be figured out by the sages. So the sort of miracles ended. And yet, here there was a miracle. And it was a voice from heaven that came down to stop this process where these two houses, Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, rather let's say Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, were arguing with each other. And the arguing became so intense, and they were so divided and polarized that it was spreading out from the house of study to the whole Jewish people, that everybody was taking sides. Are you with Beis Shammai? Are you with Beis Hillel? And it was such a polarized time that it was a problem for the Jewish people. And now in the midst of this heavy argumentation, a voice comes from heaven. Ultimately, a divine voice emerged and proclaimed, both these and these are the words of the living God. Both sides have arrived at their positions step by step, logically, with great heartfulness and wisdom, and they have both arrived at truth. And the fact that the two truths are opposite each other, are mutually exclusive. Let's say that a thing is pure or that a thing is impure. Pure means you can touch that thing and then you can enter the holy temple and be part of and bring your sacrifice. Impure means that if you touch that thing, you're now impure. You are not allowed to enter the temple courtyard until you go through a purification process. It has great practical significance. Both are true, but both can't be true at the same time. What does it mean that these and these are the words of the living God? We need a ruling. We need to know which way to follow for the people. And the divine voice said, these and these are the words of the living God. And the halacha follows Beis Hillel. The halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Beis Hillel. The Gemara immediately asks, since both these and those are the words of the living God, why were Beis Hillel privileged to have the halacha established in accordance with their opinion? The reason is that they were agreeable and forebearing, showing restraint when affronted. Right? They didn't get mad. They didn't take it personally when other people disagreed with them. They stuck to the argument. Right? They stuck to what we're arguing about, the content, not getting into personal attacks on the people who are disagreeing with them. And when they taught the halacha, they would teach both their own statements and the statements of Beis Shammai. Moreover, when they formulated their teachings and cited a dispute, they prioritized the statements of Beis Shammai over their own statements in deference to Beis Shammai. This is such a lesson for our time. In an argument, when you're trying to convince people of how to save our community, how to save our nation, how to make the law more just for more people, when you're advocating for a position, we learned from Beis Hillel that the way to advocate effectively is that we don't just state our opinion and why it's right. We have to also state the opinion of the other side. And not only do we state it, we state their position first. And as Nina has shown many times when we've discussed this on our show, and it's a tremendous insight that I got from her, you have to state the position of the other side in such a way that the other side would say, yes, that is my opinion. If you state their position with sarcasm, which is how people usually state the positions they disagree with, just giving a trash version of the other side so that they can trump it easily, that is not the way to argue effectively. You have to show the position of the other side, give its best version. Some people call this steel manning, giving the best version of the other side, and then state your position, why you disagree, and why you think you are right. Beis Hillel did that, and that is why a voice from heaven emerged and said that if the law has to be one way or the other, it's going to be with Beis Hillel, not because what they're saying is more true, but because their procedure, their method, their path, and halakha means path, their path for arriving at the truth is superior than Beis Shammai, who ultimately were credited as being more brilliant. They were more like a young Rabbi Meir. Right? Beis Shammai were smarter. They were more skilled. They were more scholarly. They had, in many cases, the better argument. But the law follows Beis Hillel because they had a better method of arriving at the truth that would take into account the teachings of Beis Shammai and even taught them first. Now, later commentators, the Rishonim, would say, really? Are we going to fix the law according to Beis Hillel just because they were more menshi? They had a better method of arriving at the truth? What if the arguments of Beis Shammai actually are superior? And the answer to that objection is, but actually Beis Hillel's arguments usually were superior. Why? Because they spent more time understanding the opinions of their opponents. And studying carefully the opinion of your opponent and your own will give you more incisiveness, more objectivity, more of that 30,000-foot view that you need to make decisions that affect policy as important as these decisions were. Now, regarding this practice of stating the opinions of their opponents before their own, we have, yes, it's these are such important teachings that it's amazing. I know we're having a long class here because so much is going on. What I'm going to teach you now, this short paragraph, I mean, this could have been an amazing hour-long lecture in itself. But what do we learn from the fact that Beis Hillel would state the positions of their opponents before their own? In other words, that they took on an attitude of humility before their opponents. This is to teach you that anyone who humbles himself, the Holy One, blessed be He, exalts him. And anyone who exalts himself, the Holy One, blessed be He, humbles him. Hold on. And anyone who seeks greatness, greatness flees from him. And conversely, anyone who flees from greatness, greatness seeks him. And anyone who attempts to force the moment and expends great effort to achieve an objective precisely when he wants it, right? Somebody who says, I got a great plan, this is going to be awesome for everybody, we need to make it happen now. He's forcing the moment. Expends great effort to achieve an objective precisely when he desires to do so. The moment forces him, and he is unsuccessful. And conversely, anyone who is patient and yields to the moment stands by his side, and he will ultimately be successful, right? So what we learn from the behavior of Beis Hillel, who conducted themselves humbly in explaining why they had a certain position on whatever question was before them, and they would state the opinion of their opponents, Beis Shammai, before their own, that they were humble in this way, we learn that anyone who is humble, God ultimately gives that person honor. Somebody who takes honor for himself, ultimately, God lowers that person and humbles them. One who wants greatness, right? He just seeks greatness. Greatness eludes him. But one who focuses on helping the people. In other words, does this teach that you can't be a politician because you're seeking authority? No. You can be a great politician if you're seeking to make a change in the world, to protect the people, to do for the people. And that's what you're focused on. Well, then you will rise and ultimately get that position of authority. But if what you're seeking is authority, you may get it in the short run, but ultimately it will be taken away from you. If you have a great idea that's going to benefit everybody, and people are saying, well, maybe it sounds great, but not right now, and you say, no, it has to be now, maybe the moment is going to pass you by. But if you say, this is a great idea, and everyone says, yeah, but maybe not now, and say, okay, maybe not now, but let's keep understanding why it's a great idea, so ultimately you'll be rewarded that change could happen. The final teaching that we're going to cover tonight, and then I'll get to your comments and questions. For 2.5 years, because right now we've been saying that there was this dispute between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. The Mishna introduced how to correct an alleyway. When we're talking about when the divine voice emerged, I don't think they were talking about how to correct an alleyway. They were talking about other things, and that dispute went on for 3 years, and it's not revealed on this page what it was that they were arguing about. But here, the last teaching in the discussion of the second Mishnah of Tractate Eruvin is going to be about something that they did argue about. And again, this could be a talk for a whole hour. For 2.5 years, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argued about, would it have been preferable for humankind to have been created or not created, right? Are we better off that we exist, or would we have been better off if we didn't exist? Now, let's think about that question. I mean, it sounds like, well, life is the most precious thing. Obviously, it would be better that we exist, that God created us, than if God hadn't created us. What could this possibly mean? So they explain. Why would it be better if we hadn't been created? Well, think about all the terrible things that people have done. In fact, the Torah enjoins the Jewish people with 613 mitzvahs, 613 obligations. 365 of them are negative prohibitions, things that you must not do. 248 of them are positive obligations, things that you must do. The fact that there are more things we can't do than what we can do is because the human naturally wants to do things that are sinful, and he must be stopped. And sort of doesn't want to do things that are his obligations because they're work, they're difficult, they cause us trouble, etc. And we have to push ourselves to do them. But there are more things that we'd like to do, to naturally do, that we're drawn to do, and that we're prohibited to do. And so it is the natural impulse of the human to get himself in trouble and to do evil. We learned that all the way back at this story of Cain and Abel, right? God said to Cain, sin, temptation will always crouch at your door, and you may overcome it. It's up to you. The humans throughout human history have done so many terrible things. Think of how many sufferings humans have imposed on each other. The Holocaust, okay. Other genocides, okay. Huge genocides. Russian genocides, Chinese genocides, African genocides. In the 20th century, in the 19th century, in the 18th century, in every age, humans do such terrible things to each other, cause so much pain, violence, murder, slavery, human trafficking. I mean, when you think about how many humans have suffered at the hands of other humans throughout human history, it's unfathomable. So Beis Shammai said, when you look at it, in the sum total of all the facts, it would have been better for the humans if we hadn't been created. Beis Hillel say it would have been better for us that we were created. It's better that we were created because there's so many things that we do that are good. But when they counted it all up and saw how much evil the humans have done, even Beis Hillel agreed. Even Beis Hillel agreed. It might have been better for us not to have been created. But since we have been created, ultimately they were counted and concluded it would have been preferable had man not been created. However, now that we have been created, we should examine our actions, the actions that we have performed in the past, and seek to correct them. And some say we should scrutinize the actions we plan to do and evaluate whether or not and in what manner those actions should be performed so that we will not come to sin. What is the value of this argument? Should humankind have been created or not? Ultimately concluding, probably not, because we've done so much harm. But now that we have been created, we have to be so careful. That's the point of this argument. We have to understand that none of us is beyond reproach. None of us is beyond temptation. All of us can cause great harm to others. And understanding our potential and the danger of the harm that we can cause leads us to examine our deeds to make sure we don't cause harm, but rather that we bring healing and love and light to the world. Isn't that spectacular? Isn't it amazing that we're receiving this teaching now on the second day of Elul as we're getting ready for Rosh Hashanah in 1 month's time, when all of us, not just the Jews, all humans will come before the heavenly throne for judgment on Rosh Hashanah in 1 month's time to receive our decree for the coming year. All of us have souls, right? And we'll be here on earth and we may not be quite aware of it, but our soul, the extension of it that's still in the world of souls, will come before the heavenly throne, and God will say, this one is going to live this year and this one is going to die this year. This one is going to be well and that one's going to be sick. This one is going to be prosperous and this one's going to lose all their funds. This one is going to have a calamity. This one's going to have peace. All those rulings will come in 1 month. And that's why this month, especially, we examine our deeds to get ready for that trial. We increase our tzedakah. We careful of all our mitzvahs, but in the month of Elul, it is especially propitious time to show mercy to those who need, to give to righteous causes, so that because we show compassion and mercy, heaven should be compassionate and merciful with us. So during this month of Elul, whatever causes you support, double down. This is the time to support the causes you support more in this month of Elul. It's a tradition to give more during Elul so that the heavenly court will be merciful on us. So all of this was to learn out why when Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai would argue, these are the words of the living God, but the halakha follows Beis Hillel. And it comes as an answer to the question, why, if Rabbi Meir was so brilliant, did the law not always follow him? And since it didn't follow him when he was young and brilliant, why is it that so much of the law does follow him as he became older? What did he learn? He must have learned these lessons about listening to the other side, about coming to a position through a process that isn't just about brilliance and intellect, but how it's really going to affect people, and then advocate for that position and make sure that it gets out there to the people. All right, let's go to your questions. Charles Abraham Ramirez Verdugo, would we consider Beis Hillel more liberal than Beis Shammai? It's a good question. I would say no. It's not. It's definitely not about politics in terms of liberal or conservative. We might say that in certain cases, Beis Hillel are going to be more lenient, and Beis Shammai will be more stringent. But even that isn't always the case. What we might say is that they take. At any rate, they're certainly going to take more positions into account than just their own analysis. So we would say that. But I wouldn't compare it to political conservatism or liberalism. It's a little bit different than that. But Charles follows up and says, how many problems we would avoid if we stated the opinions of the other party? Exactly. This principle of understanding your opponent's position so well that you can state it in a way that your opponent will say, yeah, you got me. You got what I'm saying. If we just argue our own point and mock our opponents, why would our opponents ever be moved by our advocacy? They wouldn't. They would just feel mocked in the same way that we wouldn't be moved if they were mocking us. But if they felt heard, then they would be much more open to hear what it is that we're trying to say when we could say point by point, based on what we heard them say, why we disagree. And at the end of the day, maybe I'll stay where I am and my opponent will stay where he or she is, but we'll have a relationship. And that's going to lead to a lot more, constructive dialogue in the future. Bill Eldridge. But then what do we do with issues that are time sensitive, particularly in the political sphere? It's one thing to say that the moment can't be forced, but surely we can't ignore that it's passing. Yes, when we're talking about whether one who forces the moment can pass him by. Sure. I think what it is, though, is sometimes we see, okay, this is time pressure. We got to convince everybody around us that we can't lose this moment. And hopefully our advocacy prevails and and the correct opinion is adopted. But if our position doesn't prevail, right? And we didn't force the moment, right? Like if we're so sure that it has to happen now, but the people around us disagree, well, no, this isn't the moment when it all has to happen. We feel that way, right? And so we're not able to convince everybody to act right now. If we don't burn the bridges because we feel we're right and they're wrong, then maybe they were right and this was a good argument, but this wasn't its time. And because we still have the relationships intact, later we can get the change done. But if we say, no, it has to be now or never, and we alienate everybody, then our prophecy will come true. It's now or never. They didn't go for it now, and it becomes never rather than later. And finally, Sharon Frant Brooks, this final lesson has such relevance now in Elul. Amen. Agreed. That's what I've got for us tonight. We'll be back at the regular time tomorrow, Sunday, 6 p.m. But now that it's Elul, I'm going to, with God's help, be blowing the shofar in the mornings. So I'll do just a quick live show to blow the shofar for our community, take some dedications as we've done in the past. So watch for that tomorrow morning. May you all be blessed with a sweet week, a Shavua Tov, a good vach, and a sweet month of Elul. May we examine our deeds. May we hear the call of the shofar. May we learn from our mistakes and bring ourselves, our community, our families, the world into a brighter future. All the best.